It's been almost a year since I picked up Samantha from the airport. She looked like shit, which I told her, which is about when she hit me in the shoulder as hard as she could. Miss you too, sis, I mumbled, rubbing my arm as we rode the moving elevator out and toward the parking lot. Did you talk to Brandon's family? I was going to, but I didn't have time, she said. She didn't look at me when she talked, and she was wearing those enormous sunglasses, the ones that covered half her face. I talked to his mum, I said, super briefly. She's happy you're coming. She mentioned how close you and Brandon were. Samantha groaned. Great, just great. I can't believe I'm back here. Well, I said, as we stepped off the moving sidewalk and headed toward baggage claim, past all the holiday travellers with their grim looks. I hope you brought your coat. It's going to be snowing. Samantha stopped and dropped her carry-on bag. She took off her sunglasses, and her eyes looked huge and terrified. What? It's going to snow? No, I laughed. Just messing with you. You should have seen your face. You looked like... I couldn't finish my sentence before she punched me as hard as she could and stormed off to the luggage retrieval. Driving home, I couldn't get over how weird it felt to be seeing her again. She was all balled up in the passenger seat, watching the familiar landscape drift by. It's so monotone here. I forget that sometimes. It's weird how when you live somewhere so different, the place you came from just remains the way it was. Everything is still the same here, she murmured, in a tone that was a mixture of awe and disgust. Except that, well, you know, except that Brandon's dead now. Just like Julie. Just like we'll die too. Everybody dies. But do you want to die like that? Do you want him to be the last thing you ever see? I didn't say anything. I didn't look at her. The radio was playing Rocking Around the Christmas Tree, but it was the Leanne Rimes version, and it sounded like garbage. He's not real, I finally said, and she started laughing. I spoke over her. He's made up. It's just a story. It didn't happen, Sam. Remember what the doctors said? It didn't happen. Tell that to Brandon and Julie, she said. See if they think that. Those were accidents, that's all. They weren't accidents. Or suicides. I don't know. It was something normal, not what you're talking about. If that's what you think, then great. Good for you, Matty. Glad you've got it together. All I know is that as soon as this thing is over, I am back on that plane and I'm out of here. We didn't speak for the rest of the drive. Mum and Dad were very happy to see Samantha, and she seemed happy to see them. But I didn't really care. I went up to my room and I just messed around on the internet for a while. Christmas was in 2 days. I heard my mum yelling downstairs at Samantha, "We'll finally have you home for Christmas." Reflecting on our earlier exchange in the car, I typed into Google, holidays plus increased suicide rates, but all the links said that it was just a myth. Anne, my girlfriend, texted me later that night. Her and a couple of her friends from work were going drinking and wanted to know if I wanted to come. Surprisingly, Samantha asked to tag along, and so we drove out to Charlemagne together, a divey little place with cheap pitchers and jukeboxes. Anne and Samantha immediately hit it off, which left me spending most of the night playing pool with Anne's co-worker. After an hour or so, I walked Anne out to her car. It was cold out, and all the stars were vibrating in the big sky above. Samantha really is nice, Matt. It was cool to meet her. Can't believe she lives in Singapore. Yeah, she loves it out there, I said. I'm glad you guys had fun. Can I ask you a question? Not if it's about what I bought you for a present. It's not that. Anne paused, and then added, although, I am glad you bought me a present. You always seem so unprepared. I nodded and smiled my best don't worry at all grin. I, still had to buy her a present. It was something Samantha said. She told me something really weird happened 10 years ago. She said she didn't want to talk about it, but that I could ask you if I really wanted to know. What? I felt my body go cold. She said that? Are you okay? What happened? I wasn't sure how to start. Look, I never told you about this because it's really messed up, okay? Okay, Anne said. The street lights behind the parking lot lit her up in silhouette, her pale face like a snowflake in the artificial light. 10 years ago, Sam and her friend Julie, and me and my friend Brandon, we all went out together to go sledding. Brandon and I were 12, her and Julie 15. All four of us, we hung out a lot. Our neighbourhood was one of those new developments and most of the houses were still empty. We were the only kids on the block. So, this happened on Christmas. It was the afternoon and it had just snowed a lot. I mean, a ton of snow. Everything was white and there were no footprints anywhere. We wanted to find a big crazy hill to go sledding. So we walked off, away from our houses, away from the road. I finished my sentence and then I just stood there, unable to talk. Anne started to look uncomfortable. So? She tried. Did you find a hill? I don't know, I said. I remember walking. I remember all the snow, making snow angels and snowmen, all of us laughing. But then, I don't know. I woke up and all I knew was that it was dark. I was alone and I was really cold. Really cold. I stood up and I fell over something. I looked down and I felt my voice catch. It was Julie. She was dead in the snow. Oh my God, Anne whispered. I walked in the dark and eventually some search team found me. They'd been looking all over for us. I told them about Julie. I had to go to the hospital. I had hypothermia and really bad frostbite. They thought I was going to lose my toes. Oh my God, Matt. I'm so sorry. It wasn't your fault. I tried to smile. Don't worry about it. I still have all my toes. 10 out of 10 non-amputated. Would not amputate again. She forced a laugh, and then I continued. They found Brandon. He was at some train tracks later that night. He was okay, but he was like me. No memory of anything that happened. Oh, and he lost a toe. Is Brandon your friend who... Yeah, the one who... You know, last year. On Christmas. That's why Samantha came back. There's going to be a memorial. Oh, she didn't tell me. I mean, that's a weird thing to say. But what happened to her? Where did they find her? They didn't, I said, after taking a breath. Not then, at least. The cops were looking for her. There were billboards. They put her face everywhere. But that was it. She was gone. My parents were convinced something had happened, that I was covering for her, that there must have been a guy. It was a mess. Until March, that is. when we got a call that Samantha was in Canada and that she was okay. She was found standing in the middle of the Mackenzie Highway, way up in the Northwest Territories, in the middle of nowhere. It was snowing, and she was wearing the same clothes she had on when she disappeared. She was healthy, and she didn't remember anything. What? I know, it didn't make any sense. But we were so happy that she was back, we didn't really care. Ever since she came back, she hated the snow, hated the cold. She went to college in Florida. That's why she lives in Singapore, I guess. Yeah, I nodded. She found some banking job and went there. She told me she was never coming back. But I guess she made an exception for Brendan. Holy shit, Anne breathed. How have you not told me all this? I figured that once we were together a year and you felt trapped with me, I would share my terrifying childhood memory. Haha, look at us, she said, 2 months ahead of schedule. She leaned in and we kissed, and then she was in her car, pulling out and waving goodbye. I just stood there in the parking lot for a moment, illuminated in the vanishing red brake lights. When I walked back into the bar, Sam was playing pool with Liam, and somebody had put money into the jukebox. Thumpity thump thump, thumpity thump thump, look at old Frosty go. The next day was Christmas Eve. It was cold, but dry and sunny. My mum made breakfast and my dad tried to be funny but wasn't. I could tell how happy they were, and it killed me. You never want to notice when your parents are happy, because then you realize all the other times they aren't. I spent most of the day running around, buying last-minute presents. The mall was a vast nightmare with a hideous hellbound parking lot. That I made it out alive, much less with gifts, shocked me. I drove home in the cold, the stereo blaring, "We Need a Little Christmas," as I merged out of the horrible traffic and onto Route 36. That night was quiet. Samantha seemed okay, mostly smiling politely, not really talking. My parents went to bed early. Sam poured a glass of wine, and then we talked. Mostly about her work, a bit about her apartment, what life was like living in a different country. We were talking for so long, I hadn't even noticed how late it was. "Hey, it's midnight," I said. "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas," she said back, and then stood up to walk across the living room to the front bay window. I could see the ragged red-green glow of Christmas lights gleaming. And then, something else. Snowflakes. Big and white, and glittering in the holiday lights. "It's snowing?" I asked. Samantha didn't say anything. She didn't even turn around. But I could see her shoulders tense. She dropped her wine glass, and it landed with a soft, wet thud on the off-white carpet, its red color spreading slowly. "I knew," she said. "I knew this would happen. I have to get out of here." "Sam, wait. There isn't anything to..." The next thing that happened was her turning around and hitting me as hard as she could in the face. I stumbled backward and fell, hitting what I later discovered was the coffee table. Everything vanished, all at once. When I woke up, the living room was deserted. Everything felt quiet, like I was the only person alive. I stood up and I looked about the room. The wine was still staining the carpet. Snow was still falling outside. From my angle, I could see the time on the microwave in the kitchen was glowing, 3:15. My car keys weren't in the bowl next to the door. I opened up the front door and cold air ran into the house, into my lungs. My car was not outside. I started to walk down the snow-covered street. I knew she would be driving to get to the highway, to get to the airport, to get away from the snow. Almost an hour of walking, I saw it. My car smashed into a guardrail. Its headlights were still on. There was something that looked like red wine splattered on the snow outside the car. I followed it until I found Samantha, laying cold, and dead, and frozen in the cold ground. Traumatic brain injury, the cops told us. They see it a lot. Someone in a single car accident hits their head, wanders off, bleeds out. Tragic, yes, but exceptional, no. But me, I knew. When I went to her corpse, with her blue lips caked in blood, I saw the snow in her mouth, like she'd been eating it, or like it had been shoved in. I knew what happened. The day we vanished, something else happened. We built a snowman. Typing this makes me feel weird, like an idiot. Everyone builds snowmen. But this one, after we built it, Julie shoved 2 black rocks in its face to make eyes. I looked at it, and it felt like something bad had happened. Something wrong. There were crows above us, in the bright, blue, unlimited sky. They were flying in a circle, getting smaller and smaller. I started getting dizzy, and there was a wind, out of nowhere, blowing hard, raising the white powder into the air until I couldn't see. I could just hear Julie starting to scream. And I swear, I saw something giant beginning to come alive. That was the last thing I remember, which was more than Brandon could, and Samantha never wanted to talk about it. Until last year, after Brandon was found dead in the snow, she called me. She was drunk, and she wasn't making any sense. She kept babbling on about how she tried to help the snowman, even after what he did to Julie. She said that he was just confused, and she wanted to save him. She took him to Canada, on a train, headed to the North Pole where it would always be winter. But things got messed up, Matt, she said, her voice sounding like she was trying not to cry. They got real messed up. It wasn't good. He let me go, but he told me that he could come back. Any Christmas that it snowed, that he could always come back. And he did. For the vast majority of people who celebrate Christmas, it's a joyous time. Time of year filled with sparkling lights, family, warm fires, and especially homely meals. For me, it means trying not to embarrass my wife in front of her parents, dodging the spray of half-chewed turkey flying from Great Aunt Barbara's mouth as she expresses her opinions, and smiling as I sit through several interrogations about my latest job promotion. It's sort of tradition that at least once a year, someone will have gravy poured into their hair for one reason or another. Having said that, it's not all bad. We always come away with a great story to tell our friends, and I get to see my nieces and nephews. I've always wanted kids, but something about pushing a small watermelon out of her woo-ha is unappealing to my wife. So we won't be having any kids of our own, which means I sort of father over her sister's children instead. Her sister has 5 kids. The youngest is only 18 months old and has a lot to say for a little man who can't talk. Then there's the twins, Haley and Jackie. They're 5 and adorable. The second oldest is Stephanie, and she's 7. She loves it when I magically pull coins out of my nose. And then there's the eldest, Jacob. Jacob is quietly my favourite. He really feels like he's my own son. I think it's because his own father isn't in the picture. Of the 5, he's the odd one out, I suppose you could say. The other 4 are from the same father, my wife's sister's husband. But Jacob's father was a deadbeat that ran off when he was barely a week old. When the family gathers for Christmas, it's usually a week-long event. We all drive, fly or coach in from wherever we are in the country and stay at my wife's parents' ranch. The location is quiet and secluded. The nearest town is nearly a half-hour's drive away. Coming up to it, you see long expanses of snow-covered fields, lined with tall pine forests, and the outline of the ranch looming in the distance. It's really a huge house. We all get our own separate, fully furnished guest rooms. Out the back is a large pond that's, more often than not, on its way to freezing over, and the horse stables. A part of the tradition is that all the men of the family go out there on horseback to pick up a tree and to shoot some poor creature for the Christmas dinner. Always a fun event for someone like me who, A, can't ride a horse, and B, gets nauseous when they start skinning the things they've shot. Thankfully, after the first year's chaos, they now leave the tree gathering to me rather than the animal dismembering. This year, my wife and I were the second to arrive. Her sister's family was already there and greeted us warmly, which meant that we were waiting on her great aunt to show up. Not that anyone would really mind if she didn't. Unfortunately, however, they arrived not too long after us. With everyone accounted for, the festivities began. My father and brother-in-law hunted a deer, while I cut down a nice fluffy Christmas tree. We settled in that night, after a rousing game of family 8-ball, and a little too much eggnog. However, at around 2 a.m, I felt someone pushing at my shoulder, and I grumbled a sleepy, "Stop it," to my wife. "It's me, Uncle Tom." My nephew's voice responded quietly. For a moment, I almost wanted to ignore him, but the stressed tone in his voice was too urgent. "What's up, buddy?" I asked, groggily, sitting up to push the sleep out of my eyes. "There's someone outside my window," he whispered. This woke me right up. Within moments, I was quietly tiptoeing down the hall, following Jacob's lead to peer out his window. Now the moon was near full, and the white snow on the ground gladly reflected back its light to make it quite bright outside, despite it being so early. "Over there, by that tree," Jacob said, pointing out into the yard. by the edge of the forest. Squinting, I tried to see what he was seeing. "I don't see anything, mate," I told him gently, so as not to dissuade him, but he insisted. "No, it's right there," he insisted urgently. I of course looked again. For a long moment, I searched and found nothing. I was just about to turn back to him, to reassure him that there was nothing there, when suddenly, an unnatural shape caught my eye. Further into the woods than I had been expecting, stood the silhouette of a large, tall man wearing a big red coat. Relief washed over me. I knew what this was. And that was the life-sized blow-up Santa my father-in-law usually put on the roof. Why it was on the ground, I didn't know. Perhaps it blew down. Naturally, I reassured Jacob that it was just the Santa decoration from the roof, and I put him back to bed, closing the curtains so that he couldn't see it floating there menacingly. Then, I pulled on a jacket and slippers to march outside. It was my intention to retrieve the damn thing, so that it wouldn't blow away any further, or scare the crap out of any more of my nieces or nephews. But when I got out there, I couldn't find it. Apparently the view from the window was different or something, because I spent a good 10 minutes marching around out there, unable to find it. When I got to the spot that I thought I'd seen it, I found the snow there to be slightly disturbed. In the moonlight, I could see little sparkles of something on the snow. Red glitter? That's weird, I thought. Then I noticed there was a present box sitting half nestled behind the nearest tree. Confused, I picked it up. The label on it was addressed to Jacob, in letters big enough for me to make out in the dim light. So I decided to take it back inside with me. I was maybe halfway back to the house when I realised something that sent a chill down my spine. Up on the roof of the house was Santa, in all his plastic glory, with a jolly smile and friendly wave, lit up from within by a cheerful light. I felt my head spin as I pieced the thoughts together. If blow-up Santa was up there, still plugged in, then what the heck had I seen in the woods? Was whatever I saw still out there with me? I legged it back inside, still clutching the Christmas present I'd found. Immediately upon returning to safety, I woke up my wife quietly, and she in turn woke up her father and sister. In almost no time, we were a quiet assembly of people gathered around the table, staring at this box. "Should we open it?" my wife asked, nervously. "Ew, no. What if there's something dead in it, or poisoned?" my sister-in-law asked. "I'll do it," my father-in-law huffed gruffly, moving in to grab it. But I spoke up quickly. "I think I should do it. I've already touched it. If there's something bad or poisonous, better that only one of us be exposed to it." Heavy silence followed, before my father-in-law nodded in agreement. Gingerly, I looked over the box. It was light, and nothing rattled, so I began unwrapping it delicately. Inside was a set of kids' pajamas, red and green, striped, with an elf hat to complete the look. Tucked under the clothes, however, was a card. I already didn't like where this was going, but took up the note anyway, to read aloud for everyone. Dear Jacob, I could use another little helper this year. Won't you come be my best elf? Love, Santa. That was unfortunately just the start of our ordeal. Initially, our theories on who had left it ranged from some deranged person who had somehow made their way all the way out to the ranch, to Jacob's father, who didn't know where the ranch was. Of course, none of these scenarios were very likely, and only fractionally plausible. We of course didn't tell Jacob that there was actually someone outside his window. Didn't want to freak the poor kid out. But we did make sure to keep a closer eye on all the kids. In the following days leading up to Christmas, we kept vigil, and minor incidents began to occur. In the mornings we'd find footprints in the snow, covered in red glitter, that seemed to steadily be getting closer to the house. And even during the day, the household felt watched. When having our family game day, we would find tokens for an extra player when there wasn't one. And whilst outside building snowmen, we found pieces of torn Santa clothing that did not belong to our household. My father-in-law, not too subtly, kept his hunting guns closer at hand after that. The worst things happened during the nights, of course. Jacob would wake screaming that someone was coming to take him, or that something was outside his window, or tapping on it. But whenever we would get there to check, there was no one there. Only a light sprinkling of glitter. Come the morning of Christmas Eve, my brother-in-law stepped out the back for a cigarette and found a second gift box. Inside that one was what we guessed to be a squirrel, though it was too mangled and frozen to really say with any certainty. The evening settled in that night with a heaviness in the air. We could all feel it. The joy of Christmas was being leached from the air by more than my in-laws. When I went in to say goodnight to Jacob, I found him crying in his bed. When I asked him what was wrong, he insisted that Santa was going to turn him into an elf, and that he'd never see any of us again. Now, we of course never showed him that note, and when I asked him why he thought that, his answer was vague. I decided then and there that we'd keep watch over him for the night. That seemed to calm him somewhat, and he agreed to at least try to sleep. We worked it out amongst ourselves that I would take the first watch, followed by my brother-in-law, and then my father-in-law would take the final shift. I settled in for my watch with a book and a reading light at around 10 p.m. Christmas Eve. Things were pretty uneventful until just after midnight. And then I heard it, disturbing me from my reading. It was the faintest sound coming from the window. Someone, I realised, was scratching something sharp against the glass to create a high-pitched scrape that seemed to reverberate down my spine. I stood slowly and took hold of the rifle that had been standing up beside me. I'm really still not that great with firearms. I approached the window. Using the barrel of the gun, I pushed back the curtains. What I saw next still has me shaken. Standing right there, with his face near pressed up against the window, was the most deranged individual I have ever seen. He was pressing the tip of a knife to the window, wearing a grungy Santa costume, and had long, scraggly grey hair hanging in greasy wads from under the Santa hat that in no way hid his male pattern baldness. The part that was the most disturbing and screamed lunatic the most, however, was his lips. They were bleeding and damaged. It was painfully clear that he'd been chewing off his own lips, leaving his toothless gums exposed in some places. What little remained of the lips was cracked, dry flesh, stretched into a horrendous smile. Standing in utter shock, I watched as he whispered out the words, "Santa's here to collect his little elf." That was enough to spur me into action. I closed the window and woke Jacob, ripping him out of his bed to carry him with me as I proceeded to scream bloody murder for the rest of the household to wake. By the time everyone was awake enough to process what I was telling them, the man was gone. My father and brother-in-law searched into the woods, while I stayed back home to guard the family. When they returned, they told me they'd lost the trail in the woods, but came across what they thought was where the man had been staying. At the far end of my father-in-law's property was a low cave. They'd always assumed a bear lived in there. However, when the trail led them to it on this day, they found a ragged-looking elf costume with the name Jacob crudely sewn into it, and several half-chewed dead squirrels. They decided to turn back after that and called the police. So far, they've not found the guy, but they're still out there now searching with a tracker dog. Apparently, something similar happened to another family in the area last year. Only they hadn't been so lucky, and their son had been taken. Right now, everyone's still pretty shaken up. Great Aunt Barbara is eating her weight in pudding, which is only making the experience more terrifying. We have, of course, offered the officers hot chocolate and Christmas lunch, though even now I still feel like we're being watched. So, yeah, that's how well my Christmas has gone. Yours? When selling a house, if a death occurred within 3 years of the house going on the market, the seller is legally required to inform potential buyers of said death. This requirement was not necessary in my case. Everyone within a 50-mile radius seemed to already know about Victoria Teller. It was a tragic story. She had given birth to a bouncing baby boy, whose father no one seemed to know. The baby passed away just a few months later, and Victoria, she took her own life a year after that. That much was known to be true. What was unknown were the circumstances surrounding the incidents. How the baby died. Some said accident, some said illness, some said murder. How Victoria did it, and what happened in between. The popular rumour was that Victoria, in her grief-stricken psychosis, began buying dolls to replace her dearly departed son. The doll would then suffer the same fate as the real baby in her mind, and she would bury it and move on to another. People, mostly teenagers, made it a Halloween tradition to search for the doll graveyard. They searched the backyard and the woods behind it, but nothing was found in the 6 years that house was empty. I was confident that the house that I'd bought for my family and me had nothing strange in its history, but 2 tragic deaths. The first few months living in the Teller house were rather uneventful. I had to occasionally shoo away curious locals that weren't aware our house was no longer empty, but I found no ghosts or satanic symbols or anything sinister like that. It seemed that it was just a house, one that I got a huge discount on because of what happened there, and the bad juju that was rumoured to have acquired because of it. By the time the Christmas season rolled around, I'd pretty much forgotten about Victoria Teller. It was the first year that my son, Caleb, was really aware of anything other than presents. We lined the roof and windows with lights. We hung a wreath on the door, and we put some standing decorations on the lawn. We bought and decorated a big Christmas tree, big enough to fit a toy store underneath it, which was appropriate because of how many presents Santa was going to bring Caleb that year. He was getting more excited each day, especially since we had been dropping some pretty big hints that he was getting a puppy. My family was the happiest it had ever been. Until a week before Christmas. My wife had been wrapping presents as we bought them, so that we didn't have to stay up all night on Christmas Eve like we had in previous years. She had opened the door to the closet that held the presents to find the wrapping paper torn to shreds. Her first thought was that Caleb had gotten into them, but I doubted that he would be able to contain his excitement if he had. It looked almost as if some rodents had shredded the paper, but the boxes were not damaged at all. We brushed it off as a mystery, and we moved the presents to the attic after rewrapping them. I occasionally heard some shuffling from inside that closet, but I never saw whatever critter had caused it. I figured we would call an exterminator after Christmas, just to check inside all the walls. Soon enough after that, things started to get really strange. I walked into the bathroom to find the dirty clothes scattered around the room and the hamper on its side. My wife found the refrigerator door hanging open, with food torn up and thrown on the floor. Caleb was distraught one morning when he woke up to find all of the toys that he had carefully placed in his toy box the night before had been thrown all around his room while he slept. All this, and the noises in the walls, were getting more frequent. We were hearing it everywhere in the house. My superstitious wife was becoming scared that the local urban legend was true, that Victoria Teller still haunted the house. She reasoned that the spirit was becoming more active because we were so happily preparing for the holiday with our son. Something she never got to do. Me? I laughed her theory off. I shouldn't have. Christmas Eve, my wife and I put Caleb to bed. We had to return to his room several times to tell him that if he didn't go to sleep, Santa would not bring him anything. When I was convinced that he was finally going to stay in his room, I picked up the puppy from my mother's house and brought him home. We hadn't named him yet, but he was a golden retriever pup. He was as energetic as he was soft and fluffy. After playing with him for a while, we put him to bed in his crate. We ate the cookies that Caleb left for Santa, and we turned in for the night. I was jerked from my slumber by a blood-curdling scream. My wife and I followed our son's cries for help to the living room. Caleb had snuck out of bed and found the puppy. But instead of the happy fluff ball that we left by the tree, what he saw was a final glimpse of what was supposed to be his new pet as he disappeared out of the open front door. My wife took Caleb into another room to console him while I checked for intruders and signs of a break-in. I found nothing, so I returned to the living room. We were all just beginning to calm down, well, as much as we could, when I heard a tinkling noise coming from the tree. I turned my head just in time to see a pair of big, blue eyes staring at me from the branches. I jumped to my feet and I backed up a few paces, just as the first doll dropped from the tree. It was followed by 3 others. They were those porcelain dolls, wearing what were probably pretty little dresses at one time. I couldn't tell, because the dresses were covered in dirt and blood. I watched with a mixture of terror and disbelief as all 4 of those dolls rose from the ground and started towards me. The screams of my wife and son snapped me out of my horrified trance. The dolls' heads turned as I ran from the room to find my family. I raced up the stairs to my bedroom, where I found my wife standing up on our bed with Caleb in her arms. Dozens of porcelain dolls, varying in states of damage and filth, were standing on the floor, surrounding the bed. They were making their way toward my loved ones, with their tiny arms stretched out, reaching for the woman and child who were desperately trying to stay away. I started kicking the little demons out of the way as I hurried to the rescue of my wife and kid. I didn't think a bunch of dolls would be so hard to push through, but I was wrong. For every one that I kicked away, 4 more came at me. They grabbed and pulled and thrashed, and I found myself moving away from the bed instead of towards it. After noticing that most of the dolls had directed their attention to me, I yelled for my wife to run. I hoped that I served as enough of a distraction that her and Caleb could get away unharmed. The dolls were still trying to reach them. They were clinging to the sides of the bed, climbing with delicate little hands. My wife jumped off the bed, stumbled, and fell. Caleb's head hit the floor, and the resulting cries caught the attention of many of the dolls I was desperately trying to fight off and keep away. My wife tried to save herself and gather our son before the wave of small monsters got to them, but she was too slow. I watched as the dolls quickly swarmed Caleb. My wife started trying to get them away, but they turned on her when Caleb stopped thrashing. I made my way to them just as my wife stopped fighting. I saw the despair in her eyes as a doll with a chunk of black hair and a grey, tattered dress ripped a chunk from her throat. The creatures moved so fast. There were so many of them. We didn't stand a chance. I don't know how long I stood in my bedroom, watching a horde of dolls ripping apart the two people I loved most in the world, before I realised that I was no longer being attacked. Every porcelain creature was crowded around what was left of my wife and son, feasting on them. I've regretted what I did next every day since. I ran. I bounded down the steps as fast as my feet would carry me. I reached the front door when I heard a twisted woman's voice coming from upstairs.
That's right, my children. Fill those bellies so you can grow big and strong.
I shut the door behind me and fell down the steps of the front porch. After vomiting up the cookies I had eaten earlier that night, I turned to look at the house. Peering out of the window, illuminated by the colourful Christmas lights, was a gaunt woman wearing a tattered black dress. She smiled through a veil of stringy hair as a doll climbed up the front of her dress and rested in her arms. And then she closed the curtain. I love visiting my grandma. She always makes the food that I like, and in large quantities, and spoils me. With the hustle and bustle of college life, it's nice to go back to my childhood and allow myself to be spoiled for a few hours every few weeks. Even though she has 6 grandchildren, she made it clear that I'm her absolute favourite. She'd often have the whole family around for dinner, and after they left, she'd bring out the good stuff she made just for me. We usually have a big Christmas dinner together with the whole family. However, as the years go by and the younger ones start growing up, fewer and fewer people show up. Last year, everyone already made plans, forgetting about poor Grandma. I don't blame them, but they often forget how these visits mean a lot to her, especially since Grandpa died. And that's why when I talked on the phone with her and she asked me if I had any plans, I lied to her and told her I didn't. She immediately jumped at the opportunity to politely invite me, going so far as to offer for me to sleep over at her place. She said there's one room which hasn't been used in years, and I could stay in there. I immediately said yes and agreed to stay over, realising how happy that would make her. I cancelled the plans I made with my friends, telling them something else came up. Although they were bummed about it a bit, their drinking party wouldn't stop because of me. That was the last Christmas that I would ever spend with my grandma. On Christmas Eve, I arrived to my grandma's place, and she greeted me like she always does, with a tight hug and lots of kisses. I barely even stepped inside when she started offering me food. She'd already made what could only be described as an all-you-can-eat buffet. We dug in, and once we were done, she showed me where I could sleep for the night. It was a cosy little bedroom, which apparently used to be my mum's room when she was little. Grandma told me not to leave my room during Christmas night, in order to avoid disrupting Santa in his work. She said that if I really needed to use the bathroom I could, but to be extremely quiet and not to go downstairs. On the nightstand, she left me a list of things I should do before I go to bed to ensure that I get a good present. I decided to play along and abide by the rules. I told her I'd read it before bed and do everything necessary, and she seemed content with that. She wished me good night and left the room. I was pretty tired from the trip there and the enormous dinner I've eaten. So I lay down on the bed and involuntarily fall asleep within minutes. I awoke a few hours later. I glanced at my watch and realised it was 3:01 a.m. I got up to grab a glass of water downstairs from the kitchen and groggily walked through the dark, trying to avoid any loud noises or turning on any lights, not to wake Grandma. I went downstairs and turned on the kitchen light, gulping down a glass of water. I glanced towards the living room, at the Christmas tree, and something caught my attention under the glow of the decorative lights. There was a small plate with a tiny paper that said, "For Santa." I reckoned it was for cookies and milk. But when I got closer, I realised that the plate was empty. Red liquid was in it, and right next to the plate was a small bucket. Obviously, I found this weird, but I figured that Grandma may have just forgotten to put it away or something. I turned off the kitchen lights and returned to my room. Just then, remembering the list my grandma gave me, I grabbed it off my nightstand and started reading. "Dear James, thank you for visiting me for Christmas. You made your grandma really happy. Now, Christmas is a little different in this house than what you're probably used to, so it's very important that you follow these rules on the list. 1. Make sure to close your windows and ensure they're closed properly. These old windows don't work properly sometimes, so if you feel like cold air is coming in, let me know. Number 2. Don't put any wood in the fireplace after 9 p.m. Santa will be really angry if it's scalding in the chimney or if there's still smoke. Number 3. You didn't forget about milk and cookies, did you? I stopped reading and chuckled at the list. Grandma clearly wanted me to follow the basic rules for Santa like when I was a kid. But again, I decided to oblige. I continued reading the list. In this household, we don't use milk and cookies. We use raw meat and blood. I already left a bucket by the Christmas tree, and there's a raw piece of chicken I put on the plate. Santa sure loves his diet. Number 4. If you're woken up by the sound of scratching or knocking on your window, ignore it. Your room is on the 2nd floor. There is no way to reach up to it. In fact, it's best not to look there. But if you see someone beckoning you, pretend they're not there. They may try to open the window from the outside. This is why it's so important to keep the windows closed. Number 5. You may hear growling coming from the kitchen. It's okay, because Santa never comes upstairs, and since I already left the chicken for him, that should satisfy him. By this point, I was sure Grandma was just messing with me. That was until I heard the sound of 3 gentle knocks on the window behind me. I froze in place, staring at the list, but practically staring through it. 3 more gentle knocks ensued, but I did my best not to give away the fact that I heard them. Once again, there were 3 more knocks, and the sound of scratching started. First gently, and then louder, as if a rat was trying to bite through the wall. It lasted around a minute, until it completely stopped. Only when it did I gather enough courage to slightly shift my position. That was a mistake though, because when I looked down on the floor, at the light which was cast in front of the window, I saw the unmistakable shadow in the form of a humanoid silhouette stretched across the floor. I couldn't tell for sure, but it looked like whoever was there held both his hands on the window and stared directly towards me. I decided that the best thing to do is continue reading the list and try to distract myself. Number 6. If someone walks into your room while you're sleeping and you happen to wake up, pretend that you're still asleep. In the worst case scenario, the person will sit on the edge of your bed and observe you. So do your best not to let them know you're awake. If you feel their breath on your neck and it gets progressively closer, it means they've realised you're awake. Number 7. You may hear me calling you from downstairs. Don't listen to it. I will under no circumstances go downstairs during the night. Number 8. Last and most important rule. If you get up to go to the bathroom, never, ever, ever turn on any lights in the house. He has trouble noticing you in the dark, but if you turn on the lights, he will be able to follow you wherever you go. And then not even locking your door will help. Number 9. Follow these simple rules, and in the morning, we can open your Christmas presents. Love, Grandma. The scratching and knocking had already stopped by the time I was done reading, and the shadow from the window was gone. I got into bed and covered myself over my head, shivering, and not from the cold. Sometime during the night, I heard my door open. I did my best to ignore the footsteps and the low growling noise. I either passed out or fell asleep sometime later, but all I know is I woke up to the sound coming downstairs from the kitchen. I shot up, looking around the room and at the window, rubbing my temples and thinking about the nightmare I had. I left my room and immediately heard my grandma's voice calling me from downstairs to come open the presents. I told her I'm coming, when suddenly I felt a grip on my wrist. I turned around and saw Grandma there, staring at me, wide-eyed. She leaned in and whispered in my ear with a trembling voice. "You turned on the lights, didn't you?" My hands are trembling as I write this. I'm hiding in my towel closet. I called the cops, but I don't think they're going to be here in time. I mean, who takes calls on Christmas Eve seriously? And they probably think I'm some teenager. Prank calling them since I've got nothing better to do than take away time from someone's Christmas. Who in their right mind would believe what I'm about to say anyway? Let me back things up and set the scene for you. I live alone, 2 states away from family. And I feel terrible for not being able to visit them this year. I've been having financial struggles as of recent. Paying off student loans is no joke. This is the first time I've been able to live on my own. I'm renting a cabin in the middle of butt-fuck nowhere, Wisconsin. All that's around is a convenience store and a bar. The place is nice and the rent is cheap, so who am I to complain? One bed, one bath, and a cramped kitchen that's right behind the living room. The living room's got a nice fireplace too. Keeps the house warm through the night. So, now that you've got the picture, I need to share my experience, no matter how few people see it. I didn't have big plans for the holidays. Stay at home, watch some TV, eat a frozen pizza if I was lucky. No big fancy dinner, no visitors, just an average night. That's just what happened. I kicked back on the couch with a pizza in hand and watched Christmas movies until my eyes grew heavy. I was awakened by a knock at my door at around 11:45. It's dark and snowy outside, per usual this time of year. I don't get visitors, nor could I see who it was, so I looked out the small window in the living room. Frost cloaked the glass, making it a challenge to see who was waiting for my answer. I could make out a human-like figure. My gut was telling me to stay the hell away from what was at my door before I even got a chance to move. The snow was falling so heavily, it was hard to see anything beyond 6 feet of my house. I trusted my gut though, and moved to my room. I began to think I was a bad person for leaving whoever was out there in that icy mess. Just as the thought entered my mind, the knocking grew louder. I covered my ears in response to the noise beyond my door. I faced away, and it only got worse. I was right to trust my gut. I shouldn't open the door. I can't let this go on. I exhaled deeply and threw my legs over the bed as I reluctantly shuffled over to my door. I twisted the knob and peeked outside. The cold weather nipped at my face as a reply. "Hello?" I peered through the crack. "Hi," the person started. I began to make out facial characteristics and realised it was a young woman. "My car broke down, and this seemed like a good place to seek shelter." This was a red flag to me. There's a convenience store and a bar within a mile of each other. Why show up at a random house for help? Now, I consider myself a nice guy, but the holidays don't make me a giving person. I don't like my sleep being interrupted either. I started. I wasn't sure how to respond. Her behaviour was off, to say the least. She was glancing over her shoulder, as if she could see anything through the darkness and snow. "I can give you a number for a towing company. There should be an inn at least a few miles from here. The towing company can take you." She didn't seem satisfied. "Are you sure?" she inquired. "It's awfully cold out here, and I don't know how long it'll take them to get here." She began to look more paranoid, her eyes darting from side to side, up and down. It was really freaking me out. Listen, hon, my house is a wreck, and it's the middle of the night. I'm sorry, I know it's the holidays, but I have a thing about letting strangers into my house. I immediately regretted saying those words, as her fear turned to anger. At this point, she became hysterical. She kicked, punched, and beat my door, trying to force herself in. Her polite words were now screams.
Let me in! Let me in! Let me in! Let me in! Let me in!
The Jane Doe at my door pounded harder and harder. It seemed like my door was about to break. And what the hell are you supposed to do in this situation? So, in the spur of the moment, I just locked the door. The knob rattled violently, then stopped abruptly. I picked up my phone and alerted the authorities that there was a manic woman outside my house. At this point, I figured she'd given up and left. I sat down in front of the TV and tried to enjoy the rest of the night. I pondered why she was so upset. No family, trauma. None of my theories added up. Just as my thinking had concluded, and I began to relax, I heard a faint sound. A sound that was so quiet, but seemed so loud. It was the shuffling of snow right outside my window. I pulled my blinds back and peeked outside. The dim light from the street lamps shone onto my white lawn. The woman was making a circle in the snow. I squinted, trying not to reveal my presence. My eyes began to adjust to the darkness outside. It was now 1 a.m. There were symbols I couldn't recognize, and a large pentagram in the center. When she finished her artwork, she looked right at me. She was staring right into my soul. Her gaze sent chills down my spine. Her mouth opened at inhuman angles. And then, a scream was released. I fell back into the couch. What the fuck do I do? I called the cops for a second time. Writing this, I'll be censoring my address for my own security. Here's how that phone call went. I need police. Please come quick.
Sir, we already have the sheriff and backup on their way. They should be there within the hour. Lock your doors.
I heard a click on the other end. What am I supposed to do now? I'm alone in this house, which seems much more ominous than the night before. There's some psycho lady standing in my yard in the middle of the night. To top it off, the cops that should be arresting this woman are probably out for drinks. I let out an audible sigh and sat on the floor with my back to the couch. This was not what I thought of as an ideal Christmas. I figured I might as well freshen up and get ready for bed. Any sliver of hope left in me was gone. Picked myself up off the floor and made my way to the bathroom. I couldn't risk her seeing me, so I just used the dim flashlight on my phone. I brushed my teeth and rinsed my face. Thought that might make me feel better, more alert. I was wrong. Once I'd finished, I heard a knock at the door, followed by a scream. It was deep, unlike the shrieks previously heard from the girl. Something in me clicked. I mustered the strength to peek outside. There were blue and red lights flashing, signaling help had arrived. But Something was wrong. The lights from the car further illuminated my lawn. There were 2 mangled bodies left inside of what I can only describe as the altar. Remnants of black uniforms informed me of who they were. Another guttural howl was heard. This time, only a few feet away from my window. I did the only thing I could think of, and that was to hide. This brings me to the now. I'm in my towel closet. There are 2 dead bodies in the snow, and something outside of my house. Something not human. I don't know when she, or it, whatever the fuck you want to call it, will get inside. But my gut is saying that she will. I couldn't have picked a worse spot to hide. I feel like the idiot friend in the horror movie that gets plucked off first. Please, if you're reading this, protect yourself this holiday season. Don't let it know you're there. Don't be like me. Please, save yourself and your family. I just heard something coming down the chimney. And it's not Santa. She's inside. Sorry if my story gets a little disjointed. You see, I have not slept at all. In the past, well, going on 50 hours now. Sleep deprivation. It can do weird things to a man. They say memory lapses, delusional thinking, tremors, hallucinations, irritability. It seems anything is possible for the sleep-deprived brain. I read that sometimes, sort of paradoxically, the lack of rest rather than making you feel increasingly tired can make one increasingly manic. And you see, that's part of the problem. I feel like I can't even trust my own mind at this point. I know the things I'm thinking, the things I'm hearing, and what I've seen. They don't make sense. I sound like an insane person, even to myself. My wife obviously thinks I've lost it. She won't even let me talk to the damn kid on the phone. Shit. See, this is what I mean. I'm all over the place. I'm not here to talk about my marital issues. I came to tell you about what happened on Sunday night. Why I haven't been sleeping. Let me paint a picture for you. A man sits alone in his living room, the scruff of a 3-day beard shading his face to a Flintstone-esque two-tone. The glass of the half-empty craft beer bottle in his hand reflects red, yellow and green lights from under the tall Christmas tree in the corner. Under the tree, presents, some wrapped in traditional holiday paper and ribbons, but some are a bright Barbie pink. Open boxes, Chinese takeout, litter a short, glass coffee table, along with pinched, flat soy sauce packets and the man's sloppy socked feet. Fallen fried noodles and diced carrot fleck his baggy t-shirt. On the TV, a football game. The only lights in the room are the respective glows of the flat screen, the tree, and a candle on the window. Dad's night alone. In case you haven't realized, the man is me. Time feels still, frozen in this moment. Nothing is happening, all at once. Until A knock. 2 bangs, loud and forceful. They shake me from my stupor, and I actually spill a bit of my beer as I flinch on the couch. I rise from my seat, cautiously, and I check the clock above the fireplace. It's just after 9, a little bit late for unexpected visitors. About to turn the TV off and pretend I'm not home, I'm suddenly stopped by the voices. Quiet at first, reminding me of that scene from How the Grinch Stole Christmas, when the Who's gather to sing together on Christmas morning. You know, when the Grinch is listening from up on his mountain. The voices are children's, wonderfully in tune. We wish you a Merry Christmas, coming lightly through the front door. A smile came to my face. Carolers, I thought. Even if they are making their rounds a little bit late for my taste, their voices are so clear and pleasant, I can't help but oblige them. I brush the Chinese scraps from my shirt, and I go and open the front door. Let me paint you another picture. On a snowy stoop, 5 young children, all of varying heights, stand in a shallow snow. Their colourful little boots matching the same bright shades of their puffy coats. Each of their noses pink from the cold, and buried in a thin, paperback Christmas songbook. The whole thing, it seems delightful. Until you notice the adult with them, standing behind them, down the steps, just on the edge of the yard. He's wearing a well-tailored, bright, green suit, leprechaun green. Except, he's not short. Actually, he's abnormally tall. He has a thin, black tie and a shiny bald head. He stands with his hands in his pockets, and he is looking not at the children, but directly at you. Directly at me. Staring into my eyes with a terrifying, unblinking intensity. I'm trying to look away from him, back to the cute kids singing their song. But my eyes are drawn to him, like a magnet. It's not just his stare, but the guy's grinning. A cartoonish, toothy, wide smile. It seems to pull the corners of his mouth painfully close to his ears. I try to focus on the sound of their singing. It had seemed so pleasant originally. I tried to concentrate on the song, hoping it was almost over, so I could politely thank them and go back to my football. They go on to the last verse, the fun one, at the end of the song. We won't go until we get some. We won't go until we get some. We won't go until we get some. So bring it out here. I clap a bit, still trying as hard as I can not to look up at the man in my yard. I start to close the door when they go back to singing more loudly. We won't go until we get some. We won't go until we get some. I laugh a bit, and the kids all look up at their books, continuing to sing. But for the first time, I notice their eyes. All of them, every kid's eyes, are nothing but pupil. They are completely black. No whites, no irises, just empty, black nothingness. I look back up at the man in the green, and his grin is somehow even wider than before. I quickly sputter out some sort of thank you and shut the door. I walk very quickly to the kitchen, and I get my cell phone. I don't know who to call, but I feel immediately so sick and so scared. I think it's best to have it at the ready. Outside, the voices just get louder, and they've lost any hint of holiday cheer. Instead, they just sound hostile. We won't go until we get some. I'm sure it's nothing but a prank, but it's seriously not funny. I go back into the living room and I turn the volume up on my game, trying to drown out the sound of their voices. But as loud as I crank the TV, they're singing, or rather yelling. It gets louder. At this point, I'm feeling certain that they must be waking up the whole neighborhood. And just as I'm about to call the police, they stop, cut off, suddenly and sharply. I tiptoe to my window, and I lift a single slat of my blinds to peer through the glass. My yard is empty. The streets are empty. Our house is right in the middle of a fairly long suburban road without any nearby intersections. I should have been able to see them, but they were gone. And, weirdly, there were no footprints leading away in either direction. Just the light dusting off of untouched snow. Except on the porch, and right by the edge of my yard. All over the porch were the little patterns of children's boots. And in the grass, 2 stationary footprints that looked like they'd been made by some elaborate hoax. I feel like I'm having a bad trip. I did my fair share of drugs, along with my wife, back in our younger days, and this feels like a bit of a bad flashback. I throw away the rest of my beer, turn off the TV and head upstairs to bed. I lie in my bed for hours, unable to sleep, haunted by the memory of that man and those kids. Eventually, I think somewhere around 4 in the morning, exhaustion is finally taking its toll, and my eyes close for the briefest of moments. Because as soon as I feel like I'm finally drifting off, I hear them again. We won't go until we get some. We won't go until we get some. This time, it sounds like a low chant. And it sounds like it's not coming from the front door, but the backyard, which my bedroom window faces. It has to be a bad dream. I pinch myself hard in that soft spot on the back of the arm where it really hurts. But I'm not asleep. I get down on all fours and I crawl to the bedroom window. Peeking up from the edge, I look down at my yard. The children are there, forming a long arc, running from one end of the yard to the other. And at their center, looking up at me and staring, is the man in green. I duck back down below the window. We won't go until we get some. It's still coming in waves, seeming to seep into my house and into my brain. I lay on the floor and I cover my head with one of my pillows. My mind is racing. All I want is to be left alone. I want them gone. But what were they? And what did they want? I'm lying on the floor, rocking in a curled up fetal adaptation when the light of day finally breaks through my curtains. I let the pillow slip away and I realize the voices are gone. I call my wife immediately. You see, she and my daughter were on a little mummy-daughter weekend getaway to Grandma's. I couldn't get work off Friday or Saturday, so they'd gone without me. And since she didn't have school because her winter break just started, they were going to stay Sunday night too, and come back yesterday, Monday afternoon. She thinks I'm some kind of nutbag. She thinks I've completely lost my mind. I try to send her a picture of the shoe prints but they're gone. Either covered by fresh snow or they were never there at all. I tell them it's not safe for them to come home. My wife agrees, but I think for a different reason. Because when I suggest I come and stay with them at her parents' and extend the vacation a bit, she tells me not to come, instead insisting I go and see a doctor. We hang up on bad terms and I hurriedly dress for work. Guess I'm trying to maintain some sense of sanity and normalcy. I stop for coffee on my way. Inside, they're playing their typical soft, sort of indie brand of Christmas music. I order my usual, and I'm leaning against a wall, waiting for the barista to call my name, when that song came on. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. I cringe. Of course this would come on. Frowning, I start to tap my foot in a nervous anticipation, hoping my coffee will be ready before the song gets to its final verse. Of course it isn't. They're busy, and it gets to that damn line. And then, a blip of static, and it repeats again, and again, and again, and again. Terrified, I look around to see if anyone else is noticing this. But I realize no one is noticing anything, because no one is moving. They're all frozen in place. A stream of half and half suspended mid-pour over some college girl's coffee cup. A chubby man's croissant hangs from his open mouth mid-chew. Scanning the restaurant, I almost faint. There, standing in the arch of the doors to the bathroom, is the man in the green suit. For a moment I think he's frozen too. But then he cocks his head to one side, still grinning, as big as ever. And then he winked. I took off running, and as soon as I was outside, it was like time started back up. Right in front of my eyes, cars lurched to life, and people resumed stride from their previously static stances. I drove home, calling in sick to my office. The rest of the day, I spend alternately looking out my windows and searching the internet for anything that anyone else may have experienced like this. That's how I found no sleep. But unfortunately, nobody seems to have any stories like this about these haunting carolers. I'm starting to think that it might be because nobody lives to tell about them. Last night, as the sun was setting, I called my wife back to try to make peace. I asked again if I could come and stay with them, but she again said no. She told me that I'd scare our little girl if I spoke to her. She scolded me for not going to the doctor like she said. She told me she loved me and she just wanted me to get checked out, to get better. And then she hung up. And perfectly on cue, the singing began. I nearly shat myself when I looked up and I saw a kid's face in each window of my kitchen. Backpedaling out of the room, I ran to the dining room, where the grinning man leered at me through a window there too. The voices, they grew louder. We won't go until we get some. I locked myself in the downstairs bathroom. It's a tiny room with just a sink and a toilet. But the most important thing was there was no windows. I run the sink, force some white noise, and I hunker down in the corner. Outside the bathroom, I can hear the window panes shaking, hands rapping on the glass, and the front door shaking in its frame. Not caring how crazy I may seem, I finally call the cops. I explain to the operator that there are people outside my house trying to break in. I mention the bald man in the suit specifically, but I neglect to mention that the other people are, well, kids. They say they're sending officers to my home and to stay where I am. For the next 15 minutes, the singing and the shaking of my doors and windows continues, always getting louder, always seeming closer. I'm praying that the police will show up soon. And then I hear the front door burst open. I let out an audible scream from the bathroom, and I know that I've given my position away. Before I can reach the lock, the handle turns and opens, and standing over me are 2 police officers. They just stare at me. I can't say I blame them. Like I said, I know how crazy I seem. I'm laying on the floor of my bathroom, shaking, my baggy and bloodshot eyes blinking up at them, babbling about evil ghost children and a man in a green suit. They question me for some time, and then they leave me alone. I somehow manage to calm myself down, and I catch my breath enough to convince them that I'm not completely bonkers and not going to harm myself. They promise to send a squad car by my house every so often for the rest of the night. I thank them and I sit down on my couch, opening a beer, hoping to take the edge off this whole situation. For a long time, my home is quiet. No singing, no knocking on the doors or windows. I'm again watching the football, the end of the Monday night game, when I notice lights outside. I stand quickly and go into my window. I see a cop car pull to a stop in front of my house, and I let go of an enormous sigh. But turning back to my couch, my heart stops. The TV is frozen. Initially I think, no big deal. Probably some snow on the satellite, messing with the signal. But then I see it, by the couch. I must have accidentally knocked one of my beer bottles off the coffee table. But it never touched the ground. It was hovering there, between the tabletop and the floor. Just stopped there, in the air. And then, it went back to falling, hitting the floor just right so that it breaks. And at the sound of the break, the voices come back again. We won't go until we get some. Once again, every window I turn to frames either the black-eyed face of a child or the bald, smiling man. I drop to my knees in the middle of the living room and I yell, I don't know what you want. I'll do anything, I swear. Please just stop. Please, go away. Take what you want. I won't stop you. Please. And then, the voices stop. I open my eyes, and the kids are gone. But standing there, in my living room, just mere feet in front of me, is the man. His smile reached its very widest, an unimaginable stretching of skin, revealing every tooth. And then he snaps his lips shut, suddenly wearing a very serious expression. I feel a wet spot growing in my pants, but he just nods, steps over the top of my crumpled form, and walks away. Rolling over, I no longer see him in my house. He's just gone. I spend the night in a whimpering heap on the couch, but I don't sleep. That takes us to today. This morning, things seem to be back to normal. I call into work again, however, and then spend the morning trying to get a hold of my wife. She's not answering, so I figure maybe she's still mad at me. I try her parents' home phone, but they don't pick up either. Maybe they saw my number on the caller ID. I'm seriously debating whether or not I've seriously snapped. Everything seems normal. The day passes without any more appearances from the carolers. I'm starting to think that the lack of sleep and diet of bad Chinese food may have gotten to my head. But the thing is, it's almost 3 now, and I've called my wife over and over today, and she's still not answering. Neither are her parents. I'm tempted to defy my wife's wishes and drive over there myself. But I've got this really bad feeling that I can't explain. I don't know what the kids wanted, but they said they weren't going until they got whatever it was. And now they're gone. Please, make sure you lock everybody in their rooms on the night before Christmas. It is very important for everybody's health. The name Santa Claus came from Saint Nicholas. In Dutch, that would be Sint Nicholas. And that's where Santa Claus got his name. I can personally attest to the fact that this is false. My father was paranoid. Very paranoid. He was also a little crazy. Maybe more than just a little. We lived in a neighbourhood surrounded by trees in the mountains. Growing up, our house had cameras facing every single angle of our property. Not just regular cameras either. Night vision, infrared. The night vision just made everything look grey, but the infrared was blue and any heat signatures gave off an orange glow. I know this because he'd given me access to the cameras, and I frequently viewed them from my computer. Over the years, I've seen some weird things on these cameras, but that's a story for another time. The weirdest thing growing up was Christmas. The holiday itself wasn't weird. We got a Christmas tree, had presents, all the normal things. The weird part was the night before. My dad loves his cameras. We had them on 24/7, 364 days per year. You must be confused. There's 365 days in a year. Yes, you're correct. Every year, on the night before Christmas, my dad would turn off every single camera. Weird thing is, this wasn't just my dad. The other houses in my neighbourhood didn't have cameras or anything fancy, but some of my friends told me that they weren't allowed to leave their room either on that night. Anyway, on the night before Christmas, after we laid out the cookies and the milk, my dad would make me go to bed early. There was a lock on the outside of my door. My dad was never abusive towards me, but on the night before Christmas, he would always lock me in my room. Despite being paranoid and crazy, my dad was the nicest man I've ever known. The only time he ever scared me was how serious he got on the night before Christmas.
Dallin, do not leave this fucking room. You understand me? I'll let you run around the neighbourhood with your little friends doing whatever the hell you damn well please every single day. I'll let you stay on that computer for hours searching up God knows what. Probably choking your chicken the entire day. The one thing I ask of you is do not leave your room on this night. Capiche?
Yeah, Dad, I know. You tell me the same thing every year, I know. 14-year-old me replied with attitude.
Alright then. I don't want you to be another statistic.
You mean statistic? I smirked.
Yes, boy. I don't want you to become another statistic. You saw all those missing person reports I showed you? All those people gone missing on December 26th, day after Christmas, every year. That ain't gonna be my boy.
And with that, he left my room. He was so paranoid. Did he think Santa was going to kidnap me? Santa's not even real. After he walked out of my room, I heard a click as he set the lock outside my door. I heard his footsteps protrude away as I turned over to my computer that displayed our camera footage. I counted down. 3, 2, 1, 0.5, 0.4, 0.3, 0.2, 0.1, and boom. Just like that, the camera footage shut off and displayed no feed connected. I felt like a psychic for being able to accurately predict the exact time it had shut off.
Good night, boy.
My dad shouted across the hall from his room. Good night, I shouted back. I hated this tradition. I loved going downstairs to eat junk food in the middle of the night, and I loved checking the camera to get a glance at the weird things I saw in the woods from time to time. But on this night every year, I couldn't go downstairs to eat junk food, and I couldn't bring it upstairs either. No food was allowed in my room. And all that just because of my dad's paranoia. Every year until this day, I just listened to my dad. After he shut off the camera footage and locked me in my room, I'd usually just accept it and go to sleep. For some reason, I just couldn't sleep. So despite my dad's wishes, I stayed up playing computer games. Around 2 a.m, I heard something on our roof. There were a lot of animals and other things in those woods, so this was a pretty common occurrence. But the sound I heard this time just sounded different. It sounded like something landed. Uh-oh, Killer Santa must be here, I joked to myself as I continued playing my game. Shortly after the thud on the rooftop, I started hearing heavy footsteps, followed up by our floorboards creaking downstairs. Goosebumps formed on my body, and my breathing got a bit more frantic as I worked up a sweat. The fuck is that? I thought to myself. Then, I got a thought. A thought that would prove to be the worst decision I've ever made in my life. I jumped onto the application that controls the cameras, looked over to the button that would reactivate them, and hovered my cursor over it. What if it's an intruder? I tried convincing myself. I took a deep breath, followed by a loud gulp. Then I clicked on Activate. The night vision cameras switched on. There were almost 50 boxes on my screen, each one blinking on separately. After a few seconds, they were all on. I had my eyes peeled, looking at each box, but seeing nothing out of the ordinary. That is, until I saw the living room camera. Standing in front of our dining room table, next to the Christmas tree, was a huge, overweight man in a Santa suit. He had a long beard and glasses. It was the textbook definition of what Santa looked like. My eyes were wide and filled with astonishment, as well as an equal mix of excitement and fear filling my brain. It was exciting, but weird. It's even more weird that I can't go downstairs. What would Santa do to me if I did? As I was staring at the screen, staring at Santa eating cookies, I noticed that his hand froze right in front of his mouth. I saw him slowly lower the cookie back onto the plate. He turned around, and he looked directly into the camera. He slowly brought his hand up in front of him and wagged his finger side to side. He knew I was watching him. When he did this, I slammed my hands onto the desk to boost myself up so I could dive under my bed and pretend to be asleep. I accidentally made contact with my keyboard, causing the camera to switch from night vision to infrared. What I saw on the camera was not Santa anymore. It was a big, fat creature with no clothes on. Its mouth was wide open, and it looked like it had a broken and detached jaw. It had large, oval eyes that had nothing in them. Rows of large, razor-sharp teeth filled its mouth. The creature was tall, and its arms were long and deformed. At the edge of its arms were hands with sharp claws that replaced its fingers. I screamed for my father. Instantly after, I heard footsteps shuffling to my room.
What did you do, boy? Why are you still awake?
He yelled as he unlocked the door and ran into my room. He looked at my computer and saw the camera footage on. I was on my bed crying. Suddenly, I could hear a heavy thud on our staircase.
Oh, you stupid son of a bitch. You stupid, stupid little boy. What have you done?
He said, as my crying became hysterical. He sat down next to me, hugged me so tightly, as if it was the last time he'd ever see me. And he whispered, "I love you, boy. Don't be scared. Ain't nothing gonna happen to you." And we heard another thud coming from our staircase. The footsteps were so heavy, there was dust coming down from my ceiling.
I don't know if you're gonna see me again, boy, but I want you to always remember what I taught you.
Why wouldn't I see you again, Dad? What's gonna happen?
We can't both escape. It won't let us, boy.
Dad, I love you. I don't want you to leave. My dad got up and opened the window. We were on the second floor. He picked me up, kissed me on the cheek as a tear ran down his. He threw me out of the second-story window. I landed in some bushes below our house. I don't know if I was injured or not. I had too much adrenaline coursing through my veins.
Run, boy!
He screamed as the thuds got faster. I took off running through the woods when I heard the most disturbing, blood-curdling scream I've ever heard in my life. I just kept running until I couldn't hear the screams anymore. And that was many, many years ago. I kept running until I tired myself out. I fell asleep under a tree. I returned to the house the following morning of the 26th. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, nothing. My dad was just gone. I checked the cameras. The footage too was gone. Looking through the recordings, it was just blank for the entire night. I'm a father now myself, and I've kept my dad's tradition alive every night before Christmas. I don't know if that thing was isolated to my neighbourhood, or if that really is what Santa is for everyone. All I know is I'm not gonna risk finding out. So with all of that said, please, lock all of your doors on the night before Christmas. The next time you're awake during that night, and you hear noises in your house, I suggest you stay in bed and keep your eyes closed. Don't get up. Don't investigate. Don't be a curious little fucker like I was. The last thing I'll leave you with is this. You better watch out. You better not cry. You better not pout. I'm telling you why. Because Santa Claus is coming to town. He knows when you are sleeping, and he knows when you're awake. But he doesn't care if you've been bad or good. So don't go looking for him. For your own sake. I'm going to make this as short and as clear as possible. If you find any Christmas presents under your tree after Christmas Day that you didn't place there, call the police. Leave the house immediately. And whatever you do not open that gift. I lived with my wife Maria and my 2 young boys in Melbourne, Australia. That's where my wife is originally from, and most of her family lives less than an hour from us. On Christmas Day, we usually have a lot of presents under the tree. Gifts from me and my wife, gifts from grandparents, gifts from the boys, all are placed there. And that's why last Christmas we weren't worried when I found a present under the tree that neither me or my wife had put there. It could have been from one of our parents when they came to visit on Christmas Eve. It could have been from one of the boys. It could have been from many people. And we didn't give it a second thought. It had no gift tag on it. So we decided to leave it there and not open it until we found out who it was for and who sent it. So when I got up early on the 26th to make my coffee, that was the only present left under the tree. It was a small box, maybe 6 inches tall and 6 inches wide, wrapped in bright red wrapping paper. There was a little green bow on top, and it all looked expertly wrapped. But when I came out into the living room that morning, there was something off about that present that I couldn't place. It was not until later that I realised the wrapping paper had been completely green on Christmas Day. And it wasn't until later that I noticed that red had leaked onto the floor around the present as well. Throughout the day, our kids played with their new Christmas loot, as Maria and I called different relatives, asking if they had left a little red gift under our tree. As the day went by, and more family members told us that they hadn't sent a gift, we started to get confused. We were not worried, but we were definitely puzzled. There had been no signs of a break-in or forced entry, but the gift had to have come from somewhere. Mary and I spent the entire day trying to figure it out. And when night came around, we were mentally exhausted. We put the kids to bed and followed soon after. Now, I'm usually a pretty heavy sleeper, but something woke me up that night. I'm not sure if it was a noise I heard or if I just had too much coffee during the day, but I found myself wide awake at 2 a.m. My throat was dry as hell. I finally slid out from under the covers and slipped into my slippers, careful not to wake Maria sleeping next to me. Walked out of our bedroom to the kitchen, almost slipping on some spilled water on the floor. Muttering a curse, I turned on the kitchen light and poured myself a glass of water from the fridge. I stood there in silence for a few minutes, drinking my water as I leaned against the kitchen counter. My mind was occupied with travel plans. We were going to Japan for New Year's. And when I finished the water, I put my glass in the sink and turned around to turn off the light. By chance, I happened to glance over to the hallway that connected to the living room. And that's when I froze. From where I stood, I could see right to our Christmas tree, and I saw that the mysterious present had been opened. What I had almost slipped on, what I had first thought was spilled water, was revealed to be a trail of bright red blood, leading from the open present towards the bedrooms. My body was frozen in shock for a few minutes, but I quickly snapped out of it. I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife we had, and I crept over to the hallway, careful not to make a sound. My heart was racing as I followed the trail of crimson back towards the bedrooms, and my blood froze when I realised that it was leading me into the boys' room. I stood outside the bedroom doorway for a moment, trying to build up my courage for whatever waited for me in the darkness. Then I sprang into action, running into the room and switching on the lights in one quick movement. I tried to prepare myself, but what I saw made the knife slip out of my hand and my jaw drop in horror. My boys had twin beds, one on either side of the room. Mika, the oldest, was on the left side, and Jamie, who was a year younger, was on the right. I saw Mika first, sleeping soundly and wrapped in his sheets. But when I turned to Jamie, I almost threw up. His sheets had been thrown off the bed, and he was sprawled out across his mattress in an unnaturally rigid pose. His limbs were bent back in ways that no bones should be able to move, and his unseeing eyes were open and stared up at the ceiling. Blood covered his pillow, his mattress, everything. Attached to his neck was the most hideous thing I'd ever seen. It was like a cross between a leech and a slug. It was easily almost 2 feet long and almost a fourth of that in width. The thing was latched to his neck. It was smooth and slimy, dark green, almost the exact same colour of a Christmas pine. But as I stared at it for a moment, I realised it wasn't attached to his neck. It was in his neck. The creature had torn open Jamie's throat and burrowed its head into the exposed wound. As I stared in horror, I saw the thing pulse and writhe as it fed off my dead son's blood, and God knows what else. For a cursed minute, I couldn't move. I couldn't even look away. I stared on in frozen horror before I finally tore myself away and stumbled back into the hallway. I knew Jamie was dead without having to check, and I knew that I had to call the police. But I think I was going into shock, because all I could think of in the moment was to stagger into the living room to inspect the present. It was then that I saw that the box was logged through with blood, and the top of the box had been ripped off by the creature that was held inside. There was something in there that I couldn't make out, which the police later identified as a dismembered hand, most likely put there to feed the creature once the box had been sealed. Yet when I bent down to inspect the box, I saw a small scrap of white paper that was perfectly unstained by the blood. I picked it up with shaky hands, and I was barely able to make out the words written on it in impeccable cursive. This is the gift that awaits everyone on the naughty list. Let it be a warning to you all. Cole is hungry, and he will feed. Merry Christmas. When my parents first told me the story of Santa and his reindeer, I had a lot of questions for a toddler. How do the reindeer fly? And do they just poop while they're up there like birds? Or do they stop for bathroom breaks? Did Santa meet Jesus? And most importantly, how could he get into our house that doesn't even have a chimney? Most of my questions were met with laughter by my parents, and they just reassured me that Santa had his ways. I would learn of these ways the Christmas just after my 7th birthday. It had been a brutal winter. The snow started piling up on Halloween night, and it hadn't even gotten above freezing since before Thanksgiving. School got cancelled 2 days leading up to Christmas due to the biggest storm our Midwest city had seen in over a decade. It hadn't let up since it started. We must have had 5 feet by the time my dad tucked me in that night. Usually, both Mum and Dad tucked me in, but Mum's plane for work had been delayed by the storm. Dad promised me that Mum would be home in time for me to open my presents the next day, and he left me in my room to try to fall asleep. As any kid can tell you, that was almost impossible. I tossed and turned, tried to read an old comic book with a nightlight under my blanket, and finally, just resolved to lay on my side looking out the window, looking for any glimpse of Santa. I did this every year, and never really expected to see anything. It was just a little game, like counting sheep, to try to fall asleep. I was just starting to doze off when I noticed the light over the back patio turn on. That got my attention. I walked up to my window and I looked down to see if it was an animal or if Mum had gotten home early. Instead, I saw a man standing at our back patio door, wearing a red jacket and pants with a snow-covered beard and a red pointy hat. My 7-year-old self couldn't believe that I had actually spotted Santa in my own backyard. I sprinted down those stairs in my pajamas and into the back living room. That was where the patio door was and our Christmas tree. I looked up at the glass doors where Santa was hunched over, fiddling with the door handle. He couldn't seem to get it open, which didn't bode well for me. My parents had said that he can get inside to any house he wants to. But what if the lock was too hard for him and he just decided to skip our house? What if he gave all my presents to Billy the bully who lived 2 houses down? There was no way that I was going to let that happen. So I walked up to the door and flipped open the lock. I took a step back and I gazed up as Santa slowly pulled the door open. As I felt the blast of Arctic air fill the living room, I got my first good look at Santa. I'll admit, he didn't quite look how I expected. First of all, his red pants looked like my dad's thick work pants in a different colour. His jacket had tears in it, with the stuffing, turning yellow with age, had started to pop out. A black toe stuck out of his boot, obviously a severe case of frostbite. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and looked down to lock eyes with me. I knew he was very old, but I didn't expect him to look so disheveled. He pulled his red beanie off, and I could see his bald scalp with grey hair falling over his ears. Once he shook the snow from his beard, it was more of a stringy, patchy appearance than the bushy, full white beard I expected. The thing that stuck with me the most, though, was the prominent scar that curved down like a snake from his forehead, over his left eye, and down to the edge of his lips. His mouth slowly opened into a toothy grin, with at least 3 teeth missing. He reached out a shaky hand, and he greeted me. "Thanks for letting me in, little buddy. It was getting pretty cold out there." I was apprehensive, but I extended my little arm to shake his hand. It was ice cold to the touch, which made sense, but it was his prolonged grip on my hand that bothered me the most. Once I was free, I took a few steps back and continued scanning him up and down. Something didn't feel right, but I kept telling myself that all the pictures I'd seen of Santa were just wrong. Who else could it be? He finished brushing the snow off himself, and he walked over to the cookies and milk that I'd left out on the coffee table. He ate like he was starving, spilled half the milk on his jacket as he drank it, and he just threw the dishes to the floor when he was done. Finally, he turned back to me, and he flashed that big smile again. He shuffled toward me, and he sat in my dad's recliner, but not before scooping me up and pulling me into his lap. He asked me why I seemed so nervous, which I didn't respond to. He ran his bony fingers slowly throughout my full head of hair before rustling it a bit. When I tried to pull away, he squeezed me into a tight hug and asked me what I wanted for Christmas. I just wanted to get up and go back to bed at this point, but I whispered out the name of the gifts that I'd been dreaming of for months. The Nintendo 64, with GoldenEye and Zelda. Oh, and an extra controller, of course. He let out a quiet ho-ho sound in reply, which quickly turned into a bit of a wheezing cough. I hoped that my dad would hear and come down the stairs to check on things, but no such luck. "Well, my little friend," he said, now holding my hand in his own. "I could only get that for a boy that's been nice all year." His eyes narrowed as he glared down at me and tilted his head. "You have been nice all year, haven't you?" I quickly nodded my head to answer his question. His leer, it lasted a few more seconds before he cracked a small smile and told me that he had a treat for me. A partially eaten candy cane appeared out of one of his jacket pockets, and he handed it to me. I was apprehensive at first, but he assured me that it was made with special magic from the elves. It smelled like a normal candy cane, and I wasn't going anywhere with Santa's hold on me, so I reluctantly accepted. It was the most delicious candy cane that I had ever tasted. My nervousness started to fade right away, and I devoured the piece of candy in a matter of seconds. Finally, Santa broke the silence and he asked me if Mummy and Daddy were home. Apparently, Rudolph and Blitzen had been arguing and he crashed his sleigh into a power line near my house. He needed someone's help to get unstuck so he could finish delivering presents. I told him that my mum would be back in the morning and my dad was sleeping upstairs. I offered to help, but before I could even finish my statement, I started to feel incredibly sleepy. My eyes just did not want to stay open. I felt a bit dizzy, and all I could think about was curling up in my bed and falling back to sleep. Santa chuckled as I trailed off mid-sentence. My last memory before dozing off was Santa carrying me to the couch. I woke up to the sound of our kitchen door slamming shut. I was still on the couch, wrapped in the blanket that was usually draped over the back of it, and it was very much daytime. As I regained consciousness, my first thought was that Mum was home, but I couldn't help but be distracted by the new gift that had been planted prominently in front of the Christmas tree. Unlike all of the other presents, it was wrapped in happy birthday wrapping paper. I recognized it from my parents' closet. It was then my mum walked into the living room, and before I could get up to hug her, she started grilling me on why my father had let me sleep on the couch, and if he was really sleeping this late. Then, she noticed the new present too. It was a fair-sized box, but the wrapping job was sloppy. A bow had been stuck to the top of it, and in permanent marker, someone had written, "To Logan, from Santa." My mum yelled out toward the stairs for my dad to come down. No response. She looked down at me and asked me how the present got there. I started telling her the story of how I met Santa and how he needed Dad's help to get his sleigh unstuck. I don't think she believed me at first, but then she noticed the footprints on the back patio. She yelled out for my dad again. All of a sudden, she seemed very concerned and bent down to look me in the eyes and make me promise that no matter what, I would not open the new present on the ground. Although I had no intention of keeping that promise, I nodded, and she rushed upstairs without even taking off her jacket. I immediately started tearing at the birthday wrapping paper, and soon had a plain brown box in front of me. The bottom was soggy and a bit sticky, as if something had been spilled inside. I tore at the top of the box until I could get a good grip, and then I ripped the top off. My mum's scream echoed from upstairs as I set my eyes on what was inside. At first, I couldn't process what I was looking at. My breath stopped, and I just stared for a minute before I let out a scream of my own. It was a Nintendo 64, the games I wanted, and the extra controller. Wow. My mum came running down the stairs with my dad, chasing her in a Halloween mask. She punched him in the shoulder and called him an arsehole as he pulled her into a big hug. I held the Nintendo 64 up over my head and I started dancing around. I heard my mum asking my dad where it came from, but he just brushed off all her questions, winked at me, and went into the kitchen. It was the best Christmas ever.